Every family has their ideal summer vacation, whether that's just staying at home for a nice staycation or traveling across the country to go visit friends, family, loved ones, or even just spending a few weeks out at the lake or at their favorite camping location. And for the family in today's story, their summer tradition was forever scarred one morning when they woke up to discover that their son was missing from the trailer. But what was even more horrifying than that was the reason why. But before we get into today's encounter, if you've had an encounter that you would like to have shared here on the show, please email me at the link below. If you like today's story, gently slap that like button. And if you haven't done so already, especially if you're a return viewer, hit that subscribe button. While you're at it, invite that notification bell over to the campfire, roast a s'more, or even a moof moof. And if you haven't done so already, check out our podcast. There'll be a link in the description below for that. Now, let's get into today's encounter. Ryan and his wife Kelly, along with their son Peter, lived in Western Ontario in a small city of Dryden, Ontario, which is located right in the heart of the Canadian Shield. Ryan, he had many different careers right out of high school, from spending time in the Canadian Forces as a member of the 3 RCRs to actually doing logging out in the province of Quebec. And over the years, Ryan decided he wanted to own his own business. So eventually he ended up starting up his own trucking business where he was an owner-operator. He did a lot of freelance work. His wife, Kelly, she was basically a stay-at-home mom. She did some freelance writing for various papers. And their life was good. They really loved where they were living, and they loved their basically simple life. Ryan grew up having a very strong love for the outdoors. He grew up going hiking. He grew up going camping, fishing, hunting. And through his various jobs, when he got older, that love for the outdoors really grew even more. He loved going off into the bush, doing bushcraft, doing survival, and he was completely at home when he was out in the woods. And luckily for him, his wife Kelly, she was pretty much the same way. She grew up in a family that would go camping every single weekend. She was in Girl Guides. And these two, they really just had this really strong shared passion for the outdoors. So when their son Peter was born, he was about 3 months old, they took him on his very first camping trip. And pretty much from that point on, every chance they could get, they would head off out to their favorite camping location, which was located about an hour and a half north of Dryden. And over the years, it just became the family summer tradition to head out to this campsite for multiple weeks at a time. And every time they went out there, Ryan, he would try to teach Peter something different. Basically, from the time Peter was about 3 years old, he was teaching him how to tie different knots. He was teaching him how to fish, teaching him how to make his way through the bush without tripping over obstacles. Basically, by the time Peter was about 10 years old, this kid had more outdoor experience than most grown adults do, just because of the way that Ryan would teach him and just the amount of time that they would spend out in the bush. So when they would go on these camping trips, it really was not uncommon, and it wasn't a big deal if Peter left the campsite for a little while, went off into the bush, or if he went down to the water, went fishing by himself, because Ryan knew he taught him very well, and Peter really displayed this inept ability in the bush to be able to take care of himself. So Ryan really was not worried, but he did have one rule, and that was if Peter left the campsite for any reason at all, it did not matter what, he had to take the family German Shepherd Trigger with him. They had Trigger from a puppy since the time that Peter was about 5 years old, and this dog was incredibly loyal to Peter. It would follow him around, listen to him, and it was also fiercely protective of him. So Ryan knew that if anybody or anything tried to mess with Peter, they would have to go through Trigger first. So that was his number one rule. Every time they went out camping was if Peter left the campsite, Trigger had to follow. And in the summer of 1997, just like pretty much every previous summer, the family, they planned to spend their summer vacation of about 3 weeks out at that specific campground. So when the time came, they loaded up the family vehicle, they made that hour and a half drive up to that lake, Now, they always got the same campsite. Now, this campground was very rustic. It did not have running water. All it had for using the washroom was a couple of outhouses close up by the lake. There was a small clearing that led down to the water. And their campsite was located pretty much right beside this clearing. And at the edge of this campsite, there was a narrow path that wound through the trees down to the water, where on this particular portion of the lake led into this big bay, which has this massive rock that came down into the water. And just on the other side of that rock, there was a narrow channel that actually flowed around that rock for several miles till it got to a spot where there was this concrete foundation from this old logging bridge, and the water there flowed through where those foundation blocks were, but it really was not that deep. And quite often when they would go out to that lake, they would actually go walk across those foundation blocks over to the other side of that channel to pick berries. The first half of their vacation was relatively uneventful. Every morning was pretty much the same thing. Ryan and Peter, they'd wake up early, they'd make their way down that trail, down to the water. They'd hop in the family canoe, they'd go out fishing for a little while, they'd head back to camp, they'd have some food, and then the family, they would either just sit around the campsite all day, or they'd go off of various hiking trails, they'd go to the beach. Every once in a while, they'd hop in the family truck, they'd drive to a nearby lake, they would go swimming at that lake, or take some trails near that one. But every night, they were always back at camp around dusk. They would have dinner. Once it was dark, they'd sit around the fire, they'd make some s'mores, and then shortly after, they'd go off into the trailer and they would call it a night. Then one evening, Peter was really showing signs of being restless. He was pacing back and forth in the campsite, and Ryan went up to him and just asked him if everything was okay. Peter told him that he was bored and that he wanted to go fishing, and asked if he could go fishing down to the water by himself. And again, this was not a big deal. This was something Peter had done several times before. So Ryan said, "Yeah, bud, that's not a problem. Good luck. Catch us some big ones." So with that, Peter grabbed his fishing rod. He grabbed Trigger by the collar, said, "Come on, boy," and they headed down the trail down to the water. A couple of hours later, once it started to get dark, Trigger knew that once it was dark, Peter was supposed to be back up at the site. So Trigger started whining and kind of nudging Peter with his nose, just signaling him like, "Hey, we got to go back up there. It's time to go." And Peter recognized Trigger's behavior. It was something that Trigger did pretty much every single time it would start to get dark. Again, Trigger was very protective of Peter, and he was very well trained and very well behaved. So when Peter felt him starting to nudge him with his nose, Peter started reeling up his line, and right as he went to go turn around, all of a sudden he caught a glimpse of something up on the rock across that little bay, and he kind of turned his head, looked in that direction, and just immediately his eyes lit up, because what was walking out of the bush was this massive black wolf. And Peter, he just stood there looking at this wolf just in pure amazement. Meanwhile, Trigger beside him started whimpering and actually grabbed onto the back of Peter's shirt and began pulling him away from the water. This wolf on the other side of the water on that rock just stared intentively directly at Peter, and then it actually just lied down, but it continued staring directly at him. And Peter just could not take his eyes off of this magnificent animal across the bay from him. Peter absolutely loved any form of dogs, but he had a really keen interest in wolves. He had a ton of books at home about wolves, and every time he had to do something at school about an animal, it was about wolves. And he had seen several wolves before, but never a pure black one. So he was just absolutely in awe at this wolf across the water from him. But feeling Trigger pulling on his shirt, he knew that he had to head back up to camp. So he turned around, started heading back up the path. Once he got to the bush, he kind of turned around, looked back at that wolf one more time, turned back around, headed straight back up to camp. And he just had this massive smile on his face, and he could just not contain his excitement. As soon as he stepped foot into the campsite, he just immediately began saying, Mom, Dad, I just saw a black wolf. Both Ryan and Kelly could see the excitement in Peter's face, and they were instantly curious. They wanted to go see this black wolf too. So the entire family headed back down that trail to where Peter was fishing. But when they got there and looked across the bay at that rock, there was no wolf there. The wolf was just gone. Peter stood there just looking absolutely defeated. He kind of hung his head down. Ryan put his hand on his shoulder and said, "You okay, bud? Like, are you sure you saw a wolf? Do you think it maybe was a dog?" And Peter said, "No, Dad, it was definitely a wolf. I know wolves. That was definitely a wolf. It was way too big to be a dog." And Ryan just accepted that his son just saw this black wolf, and he could see that Peter was really let down. So just to kind of try and make Peter feel better, he said, "You know what? Maybe we'll see him tomorrow. We're going to be out here for a little while. I'm sure you're going to see him again. It's okay. Don't be sad." With that, the family made their way back up to the camp, sat around the fire for a bit, and then headed off into the trailer. The next morning, when they woke up, Peter was just bouncing off the walls. He was so excited about that wolf that he just wanted to try finding it. He wanted to try seeing it again. And he convinced his parents to take a walk down to where that old logging bridge was in hopes that they would be able to find this wolf. So that day, after they had breakfast, the family, they headed down the trail. They walked for about half an hour to where that logging bridge was. They crossed that stone foundation over into the bush, and they walked around for a couple of hours, looking around, trying to see if they could see Peter's wolf. But around 1 o'clock, the family, they had to make their way back to camp to have lunch. After lunch, basically for the rest of the day, Peter wanted to spend every available minute down at the water in hopes that he would see this wolf again. And even that evening, after they had dinner, Peter asked his dad if he could go down to the rock and go fishing. And even though Ryan was a little bit hesitant just because Peter had said that he had seen this big wolf the night before, he knew that as long as Trigger was with him, nothing was getting near his son, and Wolf included, that Trigger would protect Peter with his life. And even aside from that, if anybody or anything came anywhere near Peter, Trigger would lose his mind, and it was really only about a 40-yard path down to the water, and Ryan knew he could get down there like that if he needed to. So he said to Peter, "Yeah, son, that's fine. Just be careful. Take Trigger with you, and good luck, bud." So with that, just like the night before, Peter grabbed his fishing rod, grabbed Trigger by the collar, said, "Come on, boy." And they made their way down that path, down to the water. And the entire time, he was not focused on fishing. He just kept his eyes right on the rock where he had seen that wolf. And sure enough, right as it started to get dark, he saw this wolf again. As soon as he saw it, his eyes, just like the night before, went nice and wide. He was just filled with this absolute wonder, seeing this massive black wolf come out of the trees. Again, just like the night before, this wolf stared directly at him, lied down, and this time, Trigger was acting a little bit different. Instead of just grabbing onto Peter's shirt and starting to pull him, Trigger stood there, just basically ready to run, looking directly at this wolf, and the entire time he was just snarling and growling. He was baring his teeth, and this wolf did not break its gaze from Peter to Trigger. It just kept his eyes right on the boy. And Peter and this wolf, they did not break their gaze on each other. When all of a sudden, this wolf all of a sudden began to stand. It started to push itself up onto all fours, but then suddenly, all of a sudden, it lifted its front legs up off the ground, reared up on its hind legs, and its body started to twist and contort as it did so. And all of a sudden, Peter was not looking at a wolf. He was looking at something that just struck pure fear into him. He was standing there, and his look of wonder, his eyes wide with wonder, suddenly turned to being wide with just absolute terror, because what he was looking at in front of him looked a lot like werewolves that he had seen in some of the movies that his parents would watch, and he knew what he was looking at was not really supposed to exist, and whatever this thing was, it was absolutely terrifying. As soon as this thing stood up on its back legs, Trigger, who was standing beside Peter, growling this entire time, turned and just immediately started running through the trees around that bay towards this thing. Peter, at this point, it kind of shook his trance that he was in. His dog running through the bush, just the noise and the barking that he was making. And he kind of took a step back, and all of a sudden he felt something on his shoulder. He spun around, absolutely terrifying, thinking it was whatever this thing was that he was looking at in front of him. But when he spun around, it was Ryan. And Ryan looked down at Peter, and he just saw this absolute look of terror on his son's face, and he immediately just said, "Son, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's going on? Where's Trigger?" And Peter, he could not even speak. He could not get out words to his father about what he had just saw. And Ryan standing there looking down at his son, wondering what just happened. Trigger's gone, when all of a sudden he could hear Trigger barking and snarling absolutely fiercely across the bay over in the bush. Ryan immediately started calling out to Trigger, thinking that Trigger must have ran off after this wolf, and that's why his son is so scared, that he's scared for Trigger's safety. So he started yelling out for Trigger, yelling for him to come back, and Trigger was not coming back. Ryan at this point basically just scooped Peter up in his arms, had to back up the camp, handed him off to Kelly. He grabbed the flashlight, and he told his wife that he was going to go find the dog, that the dog ran off after the wolf. So Ryan, with his flashlight in hand, started making his way down that trail that led to that logging bridge. The entire time, he's shining his light into the bush. He's yelling Trigger's name. But now he cannot hear Trigger barking anymore. There's no more sign of him whatsoever. He has no idea what direction he's in. And Ryan spent about a half an hour combing through the bush, heading over to that rock that led down into the water, constantly calling Trigger's name. But there was just no sign of the dog whatsoever. So after about a half an hour, he made his way back to camp. And when he got back into the campsite, Peter and Kelly, they were sitting around the fire. And almost immediately, as soon as he walked up towards the fire, Peter turned, looked up at him, and said, "Dad, did the Wolfman get Trigger?" Ryan kind of looked down at his son, wondering what the heck he's talking about. And he said, "What are you talking about, Peter? What Wolfman?" And Peter told him about how this wolf stood up on its back legs. And Ryan, he was not really buying that his son had seen a wolfman. He just knew that sometimes wolves will rear up on their back legs. So he told Peter that just to try to make him feel better and try to reassure him that Trigger would find his way back to camp. Peter was incredibly upset for the next couple of hours and refused to go into the trailer, but eventually he did agree that he would go into the trailer and go to sleep. So the whole family made their way into the trailer, settled in for the night. Peter the entire time lied in between Ryan and Kelly and continuously sobbed, but eventually he did fall asleep. However, the next morning when Ryan woke up, he looked over and Peter was not there. He looked over expecting to see his son, and all he saw was his wife. So he kind of sat up, looked across the trailer, thinking that, maybe Peter went and lied in the other bed. But Peter was not there either. So he immediately reached over, shook Kelly awake, said, "Where's Peter?" Kelly, too, just kind of sat up abruptly, just shocked and in an instant panic that her son's not in the trailer. And the two of them, they headed out, and they immediately started calling out Peter's name. They were screaming his name at the top of their lungs, and there was no response from their son at all. At this point, they were living every parent's worst nightmare, that their child is nowhere to be found. They don't know where he went. They don't know if he's okay. So both parents were just in an absolute panic mode at this point. And the first thing that Ryan thought of was that he has to go down to the water. Maybe Peter's down at the water. Maybe he's fishing, or maybe he went for a walk. Maybe he's trying to find Trigger. Maybe Trigger came back. Peter immediately just ran down the trail, down to the water. Peter was not there, so he just started yelling out his son's name over and over, Meanwhile, he could hear Kelly back up at the camp yelling his name as well. Before long, just after a couple of minutes of both parents screaming their son's name, the other campers in the immediate area all kind of came over to their site, and now there was about 10 different people yelling Peter's name, looking all around the campground, looking for this boy. Ryan, at this point, was really at a loss. He was terrified and he was really having a hard time thinking. He knew that he had to get help, but at the same time, he wanted to look for his son. And right as he was about to hop in the truck to head over to the nearest ranger station, all of a sudden he could hear a barking, and he recognized that bark as being Trigger's. And he immediately thought, if this is Trigger, he has to be with Peter. So just out of instinct, Ryan began running through the trees in the direction of that barking. The entire time, he's not even paying attention to the fact that he has branches hitting him in the face, that he's getting all torn up. He just kept barreling through the bush as fast as he could, continuously yelling Peter's name. And as he got up along that channel that ran around that rock, right at the top of the rock, out of the corner of his eye, he could see Trigger standing by this big pile of brush, and he could see this light blue ball lying underneath the brush, and he immediately recognized that color as being Peter's pajamas. Immediately, he just felt this incredible sinking feeling just go through his entire body, this feeling of dread, thinking that something terrible has happened to his son, and he ran in that direction. And when he got up to where Peter was lying on the ground, Peter was actually more or less completely fine. He had a couple of small scratches on his arms, he had a small scratch on the side of his face, but he was just sleeping underneath this pile of brush. Trigger, on the other hand, was pretty beat up. He had a couple deep gashes down his side, he was covered in blood, but more or less he was okay. He was definitely hurt, but he was more or less all right. So Ryan reached down, he grabbed onto Peter, picked him up. Peter immediately woke up and he just wrapped his arms around his dad in a big hug. And Ryan's like, Peter, why are you out here? When did you leave? And Peter told him that he woke up in the middle of the night and he could hear what sounded like Trigger whimpering outside the trailer. So he got up, he went to the door, opened it up, stepped outside. And when he got out, he did not see Trigger, so he started calling to him, and he said he could hear Trigger crying in the bush. So he just kept following where the sound was coming from, getting closer and closer towards that channel. But once he got up to this channel, Trigger wasn't there. It was this wolfman who was standing on the rock looking down at him, and he said that this wolfman, as it leaned its head down towards him with its mouth open showing its teeth, it was like it was about to bite onto his face or bite onto his head. All of a sudden he could hear Trigger barking, and Trigger just came jumping out of a bush, grabbed onto this thing, and managed to more or less fight this thing off. Trigger bit onto it a couple of times, and then this wolfman just ran, jumped into the water, swam across the channel, and disappeared off into the forest. And Peter said that at that point he was so scared that he just lied down on the ground and fell asleep, and Trigger lied with him all night. Ryan did not know what to make of that. He just, holding his son, so happy that he's okay, made his way back to the camp. They got there. Everybody was absolutely ecstatic that he had found Peter. Ryan, being so full of adrenaline, was not really able to get any words out aside from when he looked at Kelly. He said, "We have to go. This place is not safe." People started asking Peter what had happened, but Peter just kept his head buried into his dad's shoulder. And Ryan, all he was able to really say to anybody was that there was a dangerous animal and that it would be safer if people just left until it was taken care of. Once the family had all their stuff loaded up, they hopped in the truck, they headed back to Dryden. They ended up getting Trigger checked out at a vet. He needed several stitches, but he did manage to pull through. And even to this day, and this is well on to almost 30 years later, Peter stands by his story that what he saw out on that camping trip and what Trigger was wounded by was a wolfman. Now, to this day, his view of this wolfman has drastically changed, and what he does actually believe he encountered out in the woods that evening was actually a dogman, and he considers himself incredibly lucky that he made it through this situation unscathed, and he was incredibly thankful that Trigger made it. Obviously, Trigger's no longer with us today, but Peter does hold a very special place in his heart for that dog. He says that that dog was the best dog that he ever had. Well, that's it for today's encounter. I don't know about you, but as a parent, if I was out camping and I woke up and one of my kids was not in the trailer, I would absolutely lose my mind. And if I could not find them, I don't even want to know how I would feel, because that would be the worst thing in the world. As I said, that would be every parent's worst nightmare. But let me know your thoughts in the comments about what Peter did experience that night. Do you think this was a dogman? Do you think this was something completely different? Do you think possibly a skinwalker, something taking the form of a bipedal canine trying to lure him off into the bush? But as always, thanks for joining us. If you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button. While you're at it, hit that notification bell as well. Don't forget to check out the podcast, and I'll see you next time.